You mentioned, first, do you really, where did you find the data that I simply don't see it? Okay, let me begin by this. You designate your, under quotation marks, I'm not characterizing here, enemy, or what you are fighting against, as sometimes you call it postmodern Neo-Marxism. I know what you mean. All this, from political correctness to these excesses of whatever spirit of envy and so on and so on. Do you think they are really, where did you find this data? I don't know them. I would ask you here, give me some names or whatever. Where are the Marxists here? I don't know any. I don't, who is a Marxist here? Show me any big names of political correctness. I think they fear like a good vampire fears garlic. And this is why they are already, the one who is not a Marxist, but at least approaches economic topic, Bernie Sanders, he is already under attack as white male and all that stuff and so on. My problem would be this one. What you describe as postmodern Neo-Marxism, where is really the Marxist element in it? They are for equality. Sorry, where? They are for equality at these cultural struggles, proper names, how do we call each other? Do you see in them, in political correctness and so on, any genuine will to change society? I don't see it. I think it's a hyper-moralization, which is a silent admission of a defeat. That's my problem. Why do you call, give me, no, it's not a rhetorical question for politely saying you are an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. It's simply, I would like to know, because you, and I like this often, when you attack somebody, you said aggressively, and what should? Read more, tell me, whom. So I'm asking you now, not read more, I don't advise you, but who are? Give me some names and so on, and who are these postmodern, egalitarian, neo-Marxists, and where do you see any kind even of Marxism? I see in it mostly an impotent, an utterly impotent moralization. Please, I'm so sorry that I was too long.
No, that's no problem. Please. Well, I mean, organization like Jonathan Haidt's, what's it called? Heterodox Academy, and other organizations like that have documented an absolute dearth of conservative voices in the social sciences and the humanities, and about 25%, according to the what I think are reliable surveys, approximately 25% of social scientists in the US identify themselves as Marxists. And so there's that.
But where are the results?
Okay, but
can you name me one? I know a couple of Marxists. For example, who does very solid economic work. I don't totally. David Harvey, one. But he writes very serious books of economic analysis and so on and so on. Then there is the old guy who is far from simplification, Frederick Jameson and so on. But they are totally marginalized today. In this politically correct mainstream, you know, I don't see.
Well, yeah, your question seemed to me to focus more on the peculiar relationship that I've noticed and that people have disputed between postmodernism and neo-Marxism. And I see the connection between the postmodernist types and the Marxists as a sleight of hand that replaced the notion of the oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie as the oppression by one identity group by another.
Totally agree with you.
Okay, so so now look, we could.
But that's precisely a non-Marxist gesture par excellence.
Well, that's the, see. I guess that's where we might have a dispute, because I think what happened, especially in France in the 1960s, is as the radical Marxist postmodern types like Derrida and Foucault realized that they were losing the moral battle, especially after the information came out of the Soviet Union in the manner that it came out, that the whole bloody Stalinist, the whole Stalinist catastrophe, along with the entire Maoist catastrophe, that they didn't really have a leg to stand on. And instead of revising their notion that human history, and this is a Marxist notion, should be regarded as the eternal class struggle between the economically deprived and the oppressors, they just recast it and said, well, it's not based on economics, it's based on identity, but it's still fundamentally oppressor against oppressed. And to me, that meant that they smuggled the fundamental narrative of Marxism and many of its goals back into the argument without ever admitting that they did so. Now, I've been criticized, for this supposition, because people who are postmodernists say, look, one of the hallmarks of postmodernism is skepticism of meta-narratives. It's like, I know that perfectly well. And I also know that Marxism is a meta-narrative, and so you shouldn't be able to be a postmodernist and a Marxist. But I still see the union of those two things in the insistence that the appropriate way to look at the world is to view it as the battleground between groups defined by a particular between individuals defined by a particular group identity, so that the group identity becomes paramount, and then the proper reading is always oppressor versus oppressed. With a secondary insistence that's very similar to Marx's insistence upon the moral superiority of the proletariat, that the oppressors are by definition, because they're oppressed, morally superior. And there's the call for perhaps not revolutionary change, although that comes up above, but change in the structure so that that oppression disappears, so that a certain form of equality comes about. Now, you argued that Marx wasn't a believer in equality of outcome, and I'm not so sure about that, because his notion of the eventual utopia that would constitute genuine communism was a place where all class divisions were eradicated.
But
and so there's at
hierarchies.
Well, there's at least an implication that the most important of the hierarchies had disappeared. And so maybe he had enough sophistication to talk about other forms of hierarchies, but if that's the case, then I can't imagine why he thought that the utopia that would emerge as a consequence of the elimination of economic hierarchies would be a utopia. Because if there were other forms of hierarchies that still existed, people would be just as contentious about them as they are now. Like we have hierarchies of attractiveness, for example, that have nothing to do with economics or very little to do with economics, and there's no shortage of contention around that or any other form of ability. And so that's why I associate the social justice types who are basically postmodernist with they're postmodernist with Marxism. It's the insistence that you view the world through the narrative of oppressed versus oppressor. And I think it's a catastrophe. I think it's a catastrophe. And you appear to think that it's a catastrophe as well.
Just one sentence, and then you can reply. It's so strange that you mention, for example, somebody like Foucault, who, for me, are you aware that his main target was Marxism? Okay, for him represented his game was never a radical change, and this is what I don't like in this, what you call postmodern, let's not call them Marxists, but revolutionaries. It's this enjoying your own self-marginalization. The good thing is to be on the margin, like not in the center and so on and so on. It almost made me nostalgic for old communists who at least had the honesty to say, no, we don't enjoy our marginal position. We want to do something central power. I find so disgusting.
It's no wonder you don't get invited to lots of places.
Yeah. No, Foucault for me embodies this logic of revolution, and by revolution he meant any social change, serious, that small resistances and so on, small marginal places of resistance and so on and so on. So, okay, but let's maybe drop it here if you want, but since you are replying my question, you should have the last word here.
No, I'll stop with that. Let's move to the next. We'll get back to these topics, no doubt, as we move forward with the question. So I'm happy to let that particular issue stop.
Did you already do your Stalinist manipulation and censored the questions and how? Because this program that he described to us through some screens, questions, and so on, I think it puts him to the one who decides which questions are, as Stalinist would have put in, are the real voice of the people.
Yes,
and so
yes.
on.
Well, hopefully we can trust him.
Let's move on from that.